Good evening, everyone. I'm Jean Van Beesler, and I'm the Executive Director for Unitarian Universalist Justice Ohio. And I want to welcome you tonight to our webinar about immigrant accompaniment networks. But as we get started, I want to offer just a sentence of centering so that we can kind of ground ourselves as we get into our discussion and our presentations tonight. This comes from Margaret Wheatley, who writes, "Relationships are all there is. Everything in the universe only exists because it is in relationship to everything else. For nothing and no one exists in isolation. And we have to stop pretending that we're individuals who can go it alone." Now, as I said, tonight we're going to be talking about immigrant accompaniment networks, how they operate, and how we might be able to begin to create one here in Ohio. And these networks are created to support our immigrant neighbors who are facing some overwhelming stress and even the threat of family separation as they face our very chaotic immigration policies in the United States. Now, one thing to remember as we hear the presentations tonight, there are a number of roles for volunteers in these networks. Just a few of these roles include accompanying immigrant neighbors to district or federal court, or to ICE enforcement and removal hearings. Volunteers also raise funds for bond and legal fees, and they support families who are in crisis following the deportation of a loved one, and there is a lot more. Accompaniment networks are being developed to meet the needs identified by our immigrant neighbors as they are impacted by the situations that they face, as we've said, by the chaotic immigration laws. Now, we have two presenters tonight, absolutely wonderful. Laura Wagner will be telling us about the accompaniment network that's been set up in Massachusetts. And Laura, you can wave your hand there. She is the Executive Director of Unitarian Universalist Mass Action, which is the state action network for UUs in Massachusetts, the sister organization to UU Justice Ohio. And her role, like mine, is to organize and mobilize UUs to confront injustice and provide opportunities for all of us to live out our values and our principles. Now, Laura has a background in social work, and she's been a UU for 25 years. And during this time, she has held many lay leader positions, but her primary focus has been always on social justice. Our other presenter is Ruben Castilla Herrera. Ruben, you can wave your hand at folk. And he's going to update us on our situation and need for a network here in Ohio, so we can think about how to use the information from the Massachusetts program to organize our work in our state. Now, Ruben is a second-generation Mexican-American born in Texas, and he began working on issues of immigrant rights as the state director of Reform Immigration for America, which is a national organization fighting for comprehensive immigration reform. Now, he worked in Arizona in 2010, organizing against the anti-immigrant legislation, Senate Bill 1070 there. I know many of you have heard of that. And then he was in Georgia fighting House Bill 87. And he's been arrested on separate occasions for civil disobedience, fighting for immigrant rights in Georgia and Arizona and Washington, D.C., so that's quite a long rap sheet. Ruben is currently an organizer with the Columbus Sanctuary Collective, which is organizing around sanctuary as resistance and the Abolish ICE movement. The collective is a faith-based strategy to stop deportations and offer a unified resistance to ICE. And ICE stands for Immigration and Customs Enforcement. And then after tonight, UUJO plans to schedule, with Ruben's help, in-person follow-up trainings in different parts of the state to help us organize our own immigrant accompaniment network. So that's what we're doing tonight. And I am going to turn it over to Laura, who is going to do a screen share for us with a PowerPoint, and let's get started.
Welcome, everybody. I'm so glad to be with all of you. Let's see if I can do this right. It's a lot of pressure. Okay. Let's see. Oh, shoot. I opened the, oh, here we go. So share computer sound. Hang on, almost there. So we're going to start with what I'm about to show you. You guys can still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so this is, it's a 10-minute video that gives an overview of the development of accompaniment. I can talk more about, I think having these kind of different materials, the goal of this was to be able to connect to the humanity in this. Sometimes it's easy if one is this really the network of allies. So if sometimes if people are like a few steps or at least a step removed from a situation, it's easy to intellectualize and want to just talk about it and process it and keep it in our head. And the goal of this was to really connect people and connect. We have to see the humanity in this and connect person to person to really be moved and fully understand the what's happening in our world. So I'll go ahead and play this wave. Joan, if I didn't do the sound right.
We have a long history in this country of welcoming people in for their labor, but not wanting the people to stay. We then criminalize the people and try to remove them. Certainly over the last 18 months, the intensity and level of cruelty has increased exponentially. And we're seeing this play out when activists go to the Burlington field office. We see the people showing up that used to come for once a year for a check-in are now being told, come back in 30 days with a ticket. And no regard for how long they've been here, their work, the taxes they've paid, if they have a citizen spouse, citizen children, none of that is regarded. It's all about statistics and how many people they can forcefully remove right now. And it's devastating to families and communities to have these people just disappeared without any regard of the contributions they've been making over often decades in this country.
So my name is Pam Chester, and I am based in an Episcopal congregation. It's been a really wonderful and empowering experience to see the ways in which different synagogues have given leadership, different Christian churches, different civic groups, and everyone finds their niche. And I've heard actually the analogy that it's like an ecosystem. We have all these symbiotic organisms that help each other out in some way that nobody anticipated.
It begins with a close relationship with what we refer to as frontline partners. And those are organizations that are based in communities where there's an immigrant population. They're already providing services or support to immigrant communities. And so they know firsthand what's happening to families. And then those organizations in turn have reached out to faith organizations. And this is our role, to be organized so collectively we can build the capacity and respond to those needs and requests. We've responded to those needs by vigils outside of detention centers and the Burlington ICE office, raising money for legal fees and bonds, by posting bond and getting people out of detention, by supporting families who are in crisis with a loved one who's been removed, and also by accompanying people to district court or federal court so that they don't have to go through those experiences alone.
Okay, so my name is Gretchen Jagged. I live in Waltham, Massachusetts. I decided that supporting immigrants and refugees was really important to me. And then I found out about the Waltham Immigrant Solidarity Committee. And I also began to learn about what UU Mass Action was doing to provide accompaniment training, learning how to accompany immigrants to their court appointments, detention center visits, and to make a stand and to be visible and to advocate.
What the work of accompaniment is to go alongside of someone who's in need, to offer a sense of solidarity and comfort, We're not acting as legal aid, we're not bodyguards, but really so that they feel like they're not alone in the situation, which sounds so small and is so large. A lot of the issues that our neighbors face are not new, but they have ramped up and they've taken on a different flavor. Back in February, a number of us just started popping up kind of organically without knowing each other and saying, we want to do something. How are we going to support our neighbors through this time? And spent months trying to figure out what's the right way. In May of last year, we held a gathering, a convivio, and one of the worker center leaders stood up towards the end and said, you know, there's a story of somebody whose brother I know was at Framingham District Court for a traffic violation, and he came out and ICE was there. And he got to hide in a dumpster and didn't get taken, but a bunch of other people did. It would be great if you could go to court with us. That's what we can be doing. That's kind of the tangible thing we can hold on to. If you are pulled over and found to be driving without a legal license, not you left it at home, but you don't have one, that is a criminal charge that you have to go to court for. When you get there, you will just be given a fine and sent home, but you still have to physically go into the courthouse to do it. And so a lot of our immigrant neighbors who are driving themselves to work because they have to make an income to support their families, are driving their kids places, going to the grocery store, will often get pulled over, and they get pulled over at higher rates. And so that's kicking them into the system and just setting them into a vulnerable place. So our three main purposes when we accompany are to provide comfort, solidarity, and connection, to witness for fair treatment as best we can, and then to demonstrate community support so that the wider bureaucracy knows that we care about these people and what's happening to them. And we've heard from neighbors that it's effective, that they feel safer doing it. They feel relieved just being able to walk in with somebody who knows them. Each situation is a little different. So when you're doing the accompanying, most of it's going to feel kind of boring and kind of that awkward silence, awkward waiting. It will also feel really meaningful to have connected with somebody, even if you can't speak their language. What you're doing is being present to them.
It's hard to be there sometimes at these vigils at the ICE headquarters in Burlington and maintain your composure because it's so emotional. These people have worked for years, they've paid taxes, they're part of their community, and they're going to be deported, and they're going to leave family here. They're going to leave children here. It's a presence behind the Burlington Mall, and nobody seems to know what goes on there. Everybody's out there shopping and spending their money and being, commercial. And in fact, people's lives are being torn apart, not 1,000 yards away. And one of the lawyers came out to us when we were having one of our vigils, and he said, I just want to thank you for being here. My client was shocked that people were here. He was so grateful that there are white people who care about what's happening to us. People have come up to us and said, I'm so glad you're here, thank you. I have to come back in 2 weeks. Would you be here to support us? Having spoken to some of these folks and knowing what they're facing, it's heartbreaking.
To hear the stories of these different immigrants, to be present the day that Mauricio, the Brazilian man who's a deacon in his church and a Framingham, area resident who worked in a car dealership, and he came out of the ICE office in Burlington. He actually just turned and walked away with his head hanging down after being told that he was being deported the next day. And his little boy pulled his hoodie sweatshirt over his face and just stood there clinging to his father's leg. And each time we go to the detention center and see the immigrants, sometimes they actually drum in time to the singing or the chanting, and they hold up their hands between the bars so that we can see them. And you often see 6 or 8 pairs of hands pressed up against the window. At least once a month, there's a group that gathers outside. Often a relative of someone who's detained will come and speak to us. There was one young woman who had given birth after her husband had been detained to twins. She had been in and out of the hospital. The twins had been in and out of the hospital. She spoke about the stress that she was under and just appealed to the universe, please, bring my husband home to us. We need him so desperately at this time. Times when I've gotten really down, or I've seen Laura weep outside the ICE office in Burlington. She said, we just can't stop. We can't prevent this deportation. We accept that. And what we can't do is stop working. We have to be here. And that alone accomplishes something.
M was detained 10 months ago, has been deported and returned a number of times because he wants to be here with his family, 2 children and a wife, has a really good lawyer, and has probable reason to apply for a U visa, which is the kind of visa given to somebody who has been the victim of a crime in this country. You can then be given legal status through that process. But was arrested while that's in process, arrested by ICE, and has been detained for 10 months. And a number of us went to court in February. Maybe 10 or 15 of us sat in the waiting room. It was his first hearing. He got brought in shackles. It's the first time his kids had seen him in a long time. And we were just there to bear witness. So he had another court date in late May. It took the judge longer to log into his computer than to say appeal for release denied.
If we don't do this, these people are left out to hang by themselves, and it just seems immoral. So we show up.
All right. Why did that not stop? So, all right, let me see. Okay, we're back.
We're back, yes.
So what I'd like to do, that gives you one way, kind of an overview of what we're doing, and then I'd like to go through the slides, and I think we summarize, and then Ruben is going to talk about what's happening locally, and then you can feel free to ask questions. And I just want to reinforce what Joan said. I'm going to talk about a lot of things that are happening. I'm certainly not doing it by myself. It took months to build this network. We have thousands of volunteers involved. So I'm just going to talk to you about, some of the different ways, the capacity we've built to respond to the needs that we've been asked to engage in. So please don't feel like, oh, if you're not doing everything, that it's not enough, or that you have to personally be involved with everything. So just really thought that was a good message from Joan. All right, so I gotta do screen share. Shoot. Oh, there you are. I just thought I deleted you all. Okay, sorry, I was good though, right, Joan? Okay, this one, and then let's see, where is it? Okay, can you see the slides showing up? Yes?
You just need to start the slideshow.
Yeah, I know. View. There we go. Okay. So, when we do this and the presentations here, we try to give the relationships are super important. So we talk about some of the frontline. When I say frontline, those are organizations in communities where there's a that's typically immigrant-led, working with a large immigrant population community. So it's the front line, the direct people that are being most directly impacted. So it's important to be an accountable relationship on that hand. And then some of the other, when we first started, this slide could certainly be updated, but then it's important to share, to know the big picture, like who are some of the faith leaders, are you working with labor, like who else is at the table, to give people an idea of the depth and breadth of the network. We describe the purpose of accompaniment, and we'll talk about this more as we go through it, but it's really important to know what the person providing accompanying, what you're actually doing. So we define it as providing comfort, that's solidarity and connection. Witness, and I'll talk more about the impact, that witness is not a small thing. Sometimes you don't realize the impact you have just to be somebody who's watching, so this isn't done in obscurity, what's happening to families. And then to demonstrate community support, people, it means a lot to those that are suffering the most. It means a lot to know somebody cares. The Boston Immigrant Justice, so we have three. We have one like sort of in the middle of the state, one around that enforcement and removal office, which we refer to Burlington ICE. That's where people have to go when they're given their orders for deportation. And then there's the federal court, which is in Boston. So we've got a big network in the Boston area that really do a lot of accompaniment around that. So this is what they came up with, and they use in their trainings when they're bringing in new people. And I particularly love that when we judge the system, not people. This needs to be discussed as you're training and bringing on new people, because so much all through history, when any population is being marginalized, they're always, pretty much always criminalized as well. So the language used around many community members, it's particularly in immigrant communities, there's a level of awareness that has to be reinforced to not get caught up in that criminalization language. So very important to emphasize that. We can talk about that later if that's not clear. It's good when you're starting this to just have some basic shared language. We talk about the different roles people have, the partners, those people that have direct relationship with immigrant communities, that are in immigrant communities. Primary contact, that could be maybe somebody I know asked somebody to find someone needed accompaniment, and I reached out to the network. So I become the primary contact. We can talk more about really that person has to assess the situation and have things like the emergency plan in place in case something happens and the person is detained. So there needs to be one person who knows what to do if things go wrong, who to contact, things like do they need medication, all that. Cluster leaders, we were using the word clusters. It's just, you think about regionally in your state, where do you need a team in place? So I've been using team more often. When we first made this, we were using cluster a lot. The neighbor usually refers to the vulnerable, the immigrant that's being targeted at the moment. There's action leaders who may step up and lead a specific action, as opposed to cluster leaders who manage the volunteers and manage the requests. And we typically use the word compañeras for the accompaniment people. It helps. We put this in when we do our training. It helps. Sometimes some people can learn through verbal, describe things verbally. Some people through language, but it helps to have a visual. We put this together. So like, what does the process actually look like when somebody is being accompanied? So we created this, and it helps the people who are doing the trainings to be able to simplify it enough where you can explain it clearly to somebody, because it can feel, certainly at the beginning, it felt a little not always super clear, but to be honest, this is a grassroots movement, and grassroots movements are messy. There's not a centralized leader that has all the knowledge and controls all the details. It's shared leadership, so things can get bumpy at times, but that's the only way this is going to work and be able to be sustained. So we talk about some kinds of actions. So things like, sometimes there is a call for a rally in certain location when you really have to amplify a particular case or something that's happening. Vigils, sometimes, some folks that are new to it wonder like, oh, what's the impact of vigils? We saw those pictures outside of one of our detention centers, and we've talked to people who have come out in Massachusetts, and I'm guessing this is pretty common everywhere. Detention centers, they'll often just terrorize people until they break them down enough that they'll sign voluntary deportation orders. So they'll come in, they'll yell at them, they'll tell them they have no rights, they'll put them in solitary confinement, and after 3 or 4 cycles of those, the people just want to give up. So we've had people tell us who are on the inside that they were ready to give up, but then it happened to be a day when there were people outside having a vigil, and that gave them the strength to keep going, and we've had some success stories with getting people out. Letters of support. So trying to have multiple roads of entry, because not everyone could drop what they're doing and go to, you know, like in our case, go to Boston or take, you know, the better part of a day off to accompany somebody to court. So something like letters of support, and we'll talk about that more when we go into federal court, but we write those when they go before the federal immigration judge, and they've had a big impact with lowering bonds and getting people out of detention. Sometimes calls for advocacies, just simply giving rides, family support. And this last one is really important. And I don't know if it's the same in Ohio, but I know my organizer friends from the South always give Northeast people a hard time that we never take enough time to celebrate along the way. And sometimes you just have to be together, particularly, you know, so these families are under so much stress. It's important to create those networks, and at least quarterly we get together and have a potluck and music and just have fun together, and people bring their kids, and that helps build relationship and trust. So to remember to put those moments in there too. Being clear about if you are going to do something like this and you want a leader to take somebody to step into a leadership position, to lead an accompaniment, say to court, or lead a vigil, it's important. We have actually one page, like sheets of directions that we'll send to somebody to remind them. It helps your volunteers to be clear on, okay, what exactly am I expected to do? So things like who's going to follow up afterwards? Do you walk in with the person, you know, who determines it? And it's the neighbor, it's the person it's the immigrant who's required to go to court. Sometimes they want a big group to walk in with them. Sometimes they want to walk in alone and just know we're there. And so somebody has to work out all those details, and we let the leader do it so it doesn't get chaotic. If there's, you know, 15 people in an accompaniment, we don't want everybody asking those kind of questions and trying to, you know, manage the situation. So that's the leader who's you know, kind of managing the whole, whatever the action is. And then the people who come, it's important to, and we call them the compañeros, it's important to inform them things like examples here in Massachusetts in district court, you can't bring in a cell phone. So what are you supposed to do with it? Making sure they know how they're supposed to dress, where to go in federal court. So it just, you know, supporting people and knowing what expectations are. And in district court, we do extra training around what to do if ICE is present. We emphasize the platinum rule, which I really love. A lot of people know the golden rule, which is to treat other people the way you want to be treated. And the platinum rule is to treat people the way they want to be treated. Not everybody is the same. Again, it's really good. Sometimes when we do trainings, we have a breakout session when we ask you to reflect on a time when you felt overwhelmed. And a lot of people have been through, you know, maybe a significant death of somebody they love, a significant person in their life, or a medical crisis where you're going into a doctor. When you're the one who's freaked out, it's really hard to bring in information and be aware of what's going on. So the person who's with you, that's the role in this situation, to be aware of what's happening, to really understand what they need in that moment to feel supported. So it's not a blanket, this is what you do in every occasion. It's tuning into the person that you're with. And simple things like honoring the person's dignity. A lot of times, many of our people who volunteer for accompaniment don't speak the language of the person they're going with. And sometimes we try always to have somebody in the group that speaks the language. And it's really important when you're saying hello, just little things to remind folks, like go up to the person and say hello and shake their hand, look them in the eye, not to just simply direct all your comments and communication to the person who may be interpreting. You know, other things are just reminding it's really emphasizing how to be present in those moments. Privacy and confidentiality, knowing, like, that's again paying attention. If they're there with their lawyer, there's times if they're talking with their lawyer, the person doing the accompaniment really needs to give them some space and step back. Our legal support people in the team have advised us to really emphasize this, because it can happen really sometimes by accident and with good intentions, where somebody's really anxious and they might ask a question like, which is really related to the case. Should I do this? Should I not? Should I leave? Should I pay this? And it's really important not to throw your opinion in if you're not there functioning as their lawyer, and something you say could be actually quite damaging. We talk about financial resources, and although we do provide moving resources. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. Moving resources and things like paying somebody's bond or helping a family in crisis is really important. What that means is when you're in a moment and something happens, sometimes a person feels the person doing the accompaniment can feel so helpless. There may be an impulse to like hand the person money, and that's often very demeaning and not helpful, or it can just complicate things. So we don't do that. We try to have those networks in place that do meet those material needs, but it's done in a collective way and not, here's $20. This is really important. And again, emotions can run high in these situations. You're going to see sometimes court officers, if an ICE officer is there, a number of people in official positions that treat the immigrant, your accompaniment, rudely and terribly. It is not time to get on your soapbox and share your opinion about what you think is wrong with the system. You losing your patience in any situation when you're accompanying someone, the one who's going to be harmed the most is the most vulnerable. It's the person that's the immigrant that you're accompanying. So we really emphasize that. Something to remember. Our first role is to do no harm. Sometimes it's really important to have space to process experiences, but that's when you're not in the moment, when you're not with the immigrant. It's not their job to make you feel better or process your feelings. That's something you do back in wherever your community is, if it's a church or whatever organization you've plugged into the network with. Cultural sensitivity. Sometimes we don't give enough credit to this. I don't know what the population is in Ohio, but I know we have a number of different populations here in Massachusetts. One community that is one of my favorite, there's so many fabulous people I know there, the Quechua community, which is mostly like between Ecuador and I think even all the way up to Guatemala. Most of them were it's an indigenous population, so the arbitrary borders sort of complicate things, but culturally, you have to understand who they are, and sometimes to really understand the person. And so to get some education around that, and that's where having those frontline communities, relationships, it's really important to understand a little bit about the person that you're supporting. Let's see. And other simple things, like sometimes you'll sit all day in court and the person might be too shy to ask. And there's times like if you need a bathroom break, the person you're with may need one too. So making sure they know where the bathroom is. If you need water, they probably do, snacks. That just remembering that, again, the person you're with is probably very anxious and might be feeling, shy or not going to speak up if they need something like that. So it's not bad to offer. Let's see. So, other things, like sometimes in a big group, there's a tendency, you're sitting for a long time and English speakers will begin to have conversations and they're talking to each other, and remembering that you're there to, again, support the neighbors. So trying, to keep the focus on who you're with, paying attention to the environment. We use the phrase embodying sanctuary. So how to be present in a way, being that non-anxious presence. The best way I heard it described was a minister once who shared that when they were going through their, what do you call it, Joe? It's not like it's like an internship when you go, is it not residency? What is it? Wait a minute, what?
It is an internship.
An internship? Okay.
Yeah.
So the person was placed in an emergency room when they were, anyway, I'll think of the word. But so they were in an emergency room, and they were the clergy person. And, I don't have to describe what happens in an emergency room. So the person felt, they said, often very useless and in the way. And after a while, they were feeling, what's the point of me being here? And in a particularly down day, the person who was clergy person asked a nurse that they had worked with a lot in there and said, what can I do to be helpful? And the nurse said, you being the calmest person in the room is the most helpful thing you can do, because they're, emergency room, it's always in a just state of crisis, and it's just knowing there's a calm presence in the room. They actually are keying into that person's energy, and if the clergy person's calm, they help to stay calm enough to be focused on their task. So the person didn't even realize the impact that they were having, and often That's what we're called to do in these very highly anxiety-ridden situations. Other things we like to go through, it's important to when you're spending more time going through a training. So things like if you're sitting with somebody for a couple hours in a courtroom, sometimes it pops into people's mind, hey, tell me about your story. It's not the place. Many of the folks that have made that journey to this country and what they're going through right now is very traumatic, and so to be asked that is can bring up a lot and make an already anxious and difficult situation worse. So that's not, we do actually, once you begin that, building that relationship, we make space and invite people who do want to tell their story, because sometimes it means a lot to them to be able to let other people know what they've been through, but they do it at a time where they're comfortable, they choose to tell their story. It's very different, not sitting in a courtroom or in an ICE waiting room. Again, I think I mentioned a lot of that stuff. So what do? We do things like go to district court. In the video, we talked about so many people get pulled into the system because of driving without a license. And ICE has been hanging out at court. They have the mandate. The last one I heard this summer, it was increased to 51,000 people a day. They're supposed to detain. I don't know if that's at least pulling people into the system. So that's a lot. And their job is actually pretty easy if they just sit in a courtroom and they get the person's name verified and they can take them away right there. And they're awful. They don't identify as ICE. You often, by going, we have had volunteers go on a regular basis and they get to know who's who in the courtroom. The ICE officers will often show up in like a polo shirt and khaki pants, and you wouldn't know. The only reason why we could pick them up is they're usually kind of beefy guys that look military, and so they stand out. But so you get to know like the vehicles outside, what they look like, and it helps to assess what's going on and assess the level of risk when somebody's going into a courthouse. And heaven forbid they do get detained, it's helpful to have a plan. Who's going to tell their family? Are there kids at school that need to be taken care of? Is the person on medication? Do we need to get medication to the detention center? Letting the family know where the person was taken. All that is really important. I think I want to emphasize too, we've been emphasizing in Massachusetts, this is again from a lawyer that gave us this advice. Sometimes we see a lot on social media with videos, and there's a tendency that people, if there's something happening with ICE or police, people want to take out their cameras and video. We don't do that anymore in our network because the risk, if you happen to be videoing, and you can say, I'm videoing, and you have to announce, because it's the audio that's actually could be a federal crime if you're secretly doing it. So you could announce it, but in the event that, say, the ICE officer is going to take someone into detention, and say the person freaks out and maybe comes into some physical contact with the ICE officer and runs away, you've now got that on videotape. That is going to cause harm. That could be used in a case against the person, and you can't just delete it. Certainly, if they saw you taking the video, they can subpoena it, and if you delete it, that's a federal offense. So the videos can end up actually causing great harm, and having them, from the legal advice we got, it is relatively limited. So for the risk of harm outweighs the benefit, so we don't do it. I don't know how much we can go back to that, but like specifically what to do if somebody gets detained, it's important to spend, that's probably one of the key areas to spend with your volunteers so they know what to expect, because it's a very stressful situation. This is, so the other area with Burlington ICE, it used to be called INS, Immigration and Naturalization Services, and it was post 9/11 they changed it to Enforcement and ICE's Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and the offices are enforcement and removal offices, and that's where people go. And in Massachusetts, it's in this residential area in the shadow of a mall. People are going about their business. There's little companies all around. They're having coffee. They don't even no idea what happens in that building. And it's so having a presence there has been huge. We have Jericho walks on a regular basis, and often that's where we meet people going in and out. It matters that they know someone's outside and they care, and they'll often say, you know, what's happening with them and ask for help, ask for somebody to come with them the next time they have to go back. We also bring people to the ISAP office, that's Intensive Supervision and Appearance Program. Those are for-profit businesses that force people to wear those electronic shackles, which is such a racket. So that's GPS, and which is also in Burlington, and they'll require people to come on a monthly basis to check in. And I've been there with people from the Boston area. They have to take a train and several buses to get to Burlington and sit there from anywhere from 3 to 5 hours. And when they finally go in, it's like a 1-minute check. Oh, yep, still got it on. Okay, come back next month. So they're just making money. It's a GPS. They know exactly where they are. It's such a racket. So it helps the families who have so little money anyway, it saves them time not to take all that public transit to try to get there, to arrange rides and go with them. And then there's also the federal court. So we talk to people about, you know, things that where we go in there, what to expect. Sometimes they let folks into the courtroom. Sometimes people wait in the waiting room. But this is probably the biggest impact we've had. The Boston area, it was easier to, you know, there's a lot of volunteers at public transit, so we can get people to the courthouse. And the judge is actually on the more progressive side. Massachusetts has a pretty good track record with granting asylum, although that one case was pretty heartbreaking in the video. But the judge has gotten to know who the people who are doing the accompaniment are, and we find that we've had much lower bond fees set. So they were it could be high as like $15,000. I've seen them as low as $2,500, and they will more likely to release them if there's people with them and they have letters of support with them, because it reinforces to the judge, okay, this person has community, they're going to stay in community. So it ends up usually in a much more positive outcome than if the person goes alone. We explain people what happens, what kind of hearings happen at that court. We talk about follow-up. Again, that's really important. So if there's a next step, that's why there's a leader for an action. Somebody has to have the responsibility to let the team leaders know, so we can line up the accompaniment for the next one. So we talked about relationship building, key resources. So some of the probably where we focus most of our effort on is that the bond and legal fund, the shifting of resources is huge. It's very necessary it's a lot of expense involved, paying those legal fees. We know the outcome is far better if the person has a lawyer, paying that bond, getting somebody out of sitting in detention. If we can raise the money and get them out, their case is also going to have a much better outcome, and certainly benefits families and a person's mental health. Creating a network of legal support. So we have an ever-growing network of lawyers who will work pro bono and low bono that will help people in times of need and take on cases, which is huge. Exposing conditions. We have Sheriff Hodgson here in Massachusetts. I don't know if you've read about him, but he's worse than Sheriff Arpaio out in Arizona. The guy is just horrendous, and he just brags about the absolutely inhumane conditions in his jail. So there's a group in that area now, a growing network. That's the new area we're putting more effort into, try and grow a network there that's bringing attention to what's happening in that jail cell. And visitation. Clergy can visit in the detention centers, so that's a way we connect with people, find out where they are, what they need, connecting them to lawyers, connecting them with their family, getting them funds if they need it in there. And then the last thing that's been evolving and is probably the most difficult thing though is housing resources. That so many people need someplace to live. Often that's a barrier to get them out of detention. We need to have a place for them to go. And sometimes it's short term for a couple of weeks, and sometimes it could be an asylum seeker or somebody that's in a particular vulnerable situation and may need to live somewhere for months. So we've been growing that network and trying to get volunteers on board to meet that need. So I think that ends just So thank you. I think now, Ruben, you're going to talk about what's happening locally, and then folks will have a chance for questions.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Laura. That's very good. I just want to kind of thank you. And I think that the process of accompaniment is important. And one thing that I've noticed is the many years that I've been working on immigrant justice and policy is really people, I think people in general just want to be listened to and be with. And so it's a lot of kind of what we used to call pastoral care, right? And just being with people. And that goes a long way. And it's hard because I think that we definitely want to step up and fix, because that's the way we are perhaps trained, but sometimes just to be and to sit in a non-judgmental way is helpful. And I will also say in a way that's not showing pity, right? These are very hard stories, and lots of times even just the way our facial gestures and how do we interact with people. I think we need to be respectful of that, and you covered that during the cultural sensitivity part of it. And so Ohio is I saw some of the list of where some of you were from, and so Ohio is very unique in the sense that we're an important state, a fairly large state, but there's different sections. And so, the way we look at it is Northwest, kind of the Toledo area, Lucas County, and then Northeast, Cleveland area, Central Ohio, Dayton, and then Cincinnati South. And so sometimes we operate in general, not just in immigration work, but just as if we were in different states. And it's hard to make those connections because there's just a lot of ownership over where you're at. So I think it's important that, first of all, we understand it and accept it, not trying to change that. And the question is, how do we work with it? And really, it's just generally or good organizing step is that you let. I always say there's no best practices, but there's good practices, right? And so lots of times I always was concerned about best practices, because what works in Cincinnati may have to be tweaked differently in Columbus or Northwestern, and lots of times we tend to think that was the way to work best. So it's good to be in communication at the very least. So I'm with the Columbus Sanctuary Collective. We've been doing work through sanctuary, but also sanctuary for all, and different types of sanctuary, not just housing someone in churches in protection, but also how do we accompany people? How do we what is sanctuary for all? What are some of the sanctuary cases? We also have some home sanctuary cases that people are living and being protected, much like Laura said, in different ways. And so I don't know if you could put up that slide, or the slide that I got you, Joan. Just want to give you kind of a lay of the land, because it's important it's so important to work with an organization that's already kind of familiar with the grassroots, speaks the language, has been working in the system, and we can pass this out. And I made this list just today in terms of some of the local national groups, and I did divide it up in terms of territory. This is by no means extensive or comprehensive, but it's the work that we've been doing, the projects that we have in Columbus. The Church World Service is part of one of our sponsors that works with us in lots of ways. So Washington organization, Noel Anderson, maybe some of you know him. It works very closely with us. Mi Gente is another group that has been doing immigrant justice work, and now working on the intersectionality of work throughout the country. The collective, I mentioned that, and then we started with some of the immigrant-led organizations. In Columbus, we have Immigrant, Ohio. Glendy Fuentes is part of that. We're very close with her, and she's got her eyes in the ground, specifically with the Central American community. Ohio Latina, Onda Latino is more of an academic group of academics. Ohio State, mostly Ohio Dominican Capital University, and they do different ways of sanctuary work, but also immigrant justice. Fund for Legal Assistance. I added that. I have this. I just got this today. I don't know if you can see this, but the UUs in Columbus just started a fund. You talked about this because money is always an issue as far as how do we raise money for bond or for someone, or even filing fees for immigration case. And so anywhere in Ohio we don't have that. And so the UUs here in Columbus saw the need and have started a fund, and they just sent me a flyer. I just got it today, actually. but there's a contact there. So the fundraising is important. Fund for legal assistance. The law school, March Law School, we have interns that work with us to do a lot of the legwork. Some of the bond. They have a team that actually does some of the pre-bond work. So the attorneys that are doing low bono work, they're doing some of the legwork, and they can legally do that. And so we work very closely with Moritz School, National Association of Social Workers, and Laura, you talked about kind of self-care, and the social workers have been working with immigrants and people who speak Spanish, but also with those of us who are working in the community, and that's important. And Dayton, we work with ABLE, which is actually also in Northwest Ohio and Columbus now, but specifically that's the group that I have in Dayton. Toledo, the Toledo Immigrant Alliance, which is led by Lucia Mendoza. Northeast Ohio, there's OLA, a very well-known underground group that is working and doing all kinds of, already doing kinds of work with the community in different capacities. Ohio Immigrant Alliance, IRTF in Cincinnati, Interreligious Task Force, and Akron Immigration Faith Group. So there's faith-based groups, and there's some other organizations. And then Cincinnati, we have a little bit less work with them, but specifically there's a group called Transformations, CDC, that's led by a woman by Nancy Sullivan, the Sanctuary Working Group working on Sanctuary, and then the Cincinnati Interfaith Worker Center. So those are all just kind of an idea of some people that we can get connected to in order to start this accompaniment work that is much needed. And so the types of accompaniment that we have already done in Ohio, I think Laura's mentioned some of them, but certainly bond hearings, ICE check-ins. The local ICE office in Ohio is in Columbus, downtown Columbus. It's right in downtown. And so what we've done here to date is really what people who already know who we are have contacted us, and we've gone with them to ICE check-ins. And it's basically it's accompaniment, just being with them. And in some cases, just taking note of what's happening, some of the interactions, but also just being there in support. The Cleveland Immigration Court, the immigration court in this area is in Cleveland, and so everyone has got to go to Cleveland. And so lots of times people miss their court dates because they don't have transportation. So part of it is actually providing transportation as well, and taking families and connecting with attorneys. And sometimes we have rallies, depending on the case, but the main thing is getting them there, because that's a big issue. People will miss their court dates. Once they do that, then it's another issue, and possibly a deportation order. So Cleveland Immigration Court, but also the county or the civic court for municipal courts. In Ohio, we have townships. There's lots of little municipalities, townships, mayor's courts, and it's almost hard to keep track of them. But we have in those areas that are more likely, like in Northeast Ohio, Ashtabula, we know that when they go into court there, that likely immigration will be there. It's happening in Franklin County a little bit more often as well. And so we have been able to do that, working with immigration attorneys or traffic attorneys. And so having that relationship with attorneys is important, and accompanying people to local municipal courts and county courthouse. The other thing that Accompaniment has done is it's kind of a part of the rapid response team. That's kind of became a buzz term, but how do we communicate? What is the process that we use to call people? Who's the key people? And some of those slides talked about that. But in rapid response could also be, in the terms of work we've been doing here, is with ICE raids and pickups of people that we've been working with. How to respond? Who's more likely? Who's available? How do we get that rapid response team going? And then the other is more kind of a personal. Once we've created a relationship. There's a woman, by the way, that came from Leipzig, Ohio, which is Northwest Ohio. Leipzig, interesting enough, is a German-founded town by German immigrants. It's a farming community. It is a awful situation, awful story that happened where her husband, they're from El Salvador, her husband ran over their little 12-year-old, and during the whole police coming, someone asked him about if he was a citizen. He ends up getting taken to Geauga County, one of the county jails, and meanwhile his son is rushed to the Nationwide Children's Hospital in Columbus. His leg is amputated. His mother is here, And so we're trying to connect with networks and get him out. We were able to get him out in bond. We had a company team that brought him from there to when he was released, brought him back to Columbus, and then now some of the accompaniment that we're doing with them is just taking them to the doctors, to schools, setting up those things. So it's a good way to actually get to know people hands on. But those are the kind of on underground crisis things that we are doing, and so those are the kind of things that we're doing. We're not. What we need to do, and what we're hoping to do with Joe and the UJO is to do it in a more structured way, so to speak, and have a teams that are already there. And that's why I'm glad to see some people out here. I know there's more people that had signed up, but this is a good start of how do we help people, because right now, as far as policy, immigration policy, nothing's happening. The only thing that is happening with immigration is criminalization, detention, detainment, and deportation. And so the question is, what can we do, and how can accompaniment be a part of that? And so that's something that we've always needed, and actually, that's something that's been happening already within the community. But it's time for us to kind of step up, and those of us who are privileged in different ways, but they have to provide those transportation and those services. And so I'm excited about the possibility of stepping up here in Ohio. The Collective is one of those organizations that's on the ground and work with all these other organizations throughout the state. And so we need your help, and I want to have a little bit of a conversation sometime to see how we can move on, and what some of your questions are.
Thank you. Thank you, Ben, and thank you, Laura. So that was a lot of excellent information. Some of it a little hard information to hear.
Yeah.
What kind of questions do y'all have? You can unmute yourself and ask the questions, or raise your hand if you don't know how to unmute, and I will do that for you. Any thoughts, any questions?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
My name is Anwell. I'm from Dayton, and I just wanted to have a rapid response team that is helping to provide transportation and some concrete support to local immigrants. And LEAD, which is a local organization that's part of PICO, and already contains a lot of different kinds of faith-based groups, is having a meeting on the 18th with hopes of starting an interfaith coalition here in the Dayton area to help support the local immigrant communities.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful to hear. I was wondering if you can send me more information about that. If you need some invitations, some help in getting the word out. I would love to know more about that for the network as well as this.
What is LEAD? Is that an acronym?
It is, and I'm embarrassed to admit I don't know what it stands for. I can't remember. It's a group of local faith communities, some Christian, there's some Jewish, some Muslim, and our Unitarian Fellowship, which is what I'm part of, is a member of it. And then it's part of a bigger organization called PICO, which is Lynn Buffington, who is from Dayton, just said she thinks it means something, and then it went away. who's my buddy?
Leaders in Education and Action in Dayton.
Okay, there you go. Thank you, Lynn. Lynn always knows.
Okay. Yeah, there's a lot of need for this. People are seeing the need, bubbling up here and there. And
if I can just make a comment on it, and I don't know who the relationships are, but I'm just going to share a little anecdote from our end of it. So we've had this network in place now for like 2 years, but when things, when the Trump quake first hit, there was definite a feeling of, oh my God, we've got to organize, we've got to mobilize in the faith community. And it was one of our PICO-led partners, and we were doing Know Your Rights and getting rapid response teams ready because we were anticipating raids. And what happened was that moved along for a couple of months, but it was because of the relationships and like the time spent with worker centers and the people we knew, like they watched us for a while and then trusted leaders. This one particular worker, he was the first one who said, this is really good, but one, the Know Your Rights training doesn't really translate to the real world. And two, when we get detained, it's happening at like 5 o'clock in the morning. They're grabbing us before work. You're not going to get anybody there. It's over with in 15 minutes. So it was through those relationships that we had to completely pivot and redesign what we would say. So that sounds wonderful. And I have no idea, who's involved in that, but it's so important to have that grounded relationship, because it's easy. We did it. We got ahead of ourselves building something that nobody needed. So
I really appreciate that. The rapid response team here, while that is its name, it's primarily led by Gabriella Pickett, who's a wonderful immigrant advocate here. And our responses are often less than rapid. There are things like transportation, both to doctors and that kind of thing, but also to immigration check-ins and all that kind of stuff. And then also helping to provide support. Gabriella always seems to know who in the immigrant community is most in need at any given time. So it's kind of really a misnomer at this point, at least in.
Something that we've done in Columbus with the collective is I mean, it's kind of like the starfish stories. You're helping one starfish.
Exactly.
And that's not totally, there's some good to that, I think. And so what we've been doing, rather than having building a container and then trying to put everything in it, is creating teams around different cases, right? And so we're doing that with Sanctuary. Actually, there's an Edith team, a Mariam team, and they don't have the same strat, even though they're in the same city. But there's a team of people that are getting to know these people, and by first they're learning Spanish and learning English in all ways, helping them in different ways, because accompaniment is it's just not a one-time thing, right? And so helping individual families, and I feel like during this age of Trumpism, I think that's valid. We're going back to our community, and really the immigrant community is already doing that. They're already doing that within their own community. We're just helping them and helping them with some of the resources we have. And so we're creating teams with different cases, and there's not a lot, but out of that comes someone else, right? And then we create a team around them. And so it's rather emergent, and it's grassroots, not efficient, but it's personal relationship and in the moment. It's more likely when you know someone, you have a team that they will respond more rapidly than a phone network, right? Like, show up here. And so that's kind of what we're learning. And back to the Know Your Rights, I mean, we found that the people that were attending were allies, were solid for the most part, right? And but you live and learn. You adjust. That's what I meant by good practices. Good practices change in the moment.
Mm-hmm. And all of this is, as Ben was saying, it's networking. It's not trying to create overarching statewide heavy-duty organizational structure. But in networking, we can find a lot of strength. And in networking, we link to resources we didn't even know were there, and people that we didn't know. So that's the purpose of trying to start some of those relationships and those networks. And we'll run into other people as we do that.
Right.
Other questions? One of the things we want to do is use this wonderful introduction and use the experience that Ruben brings and do some face-to-face training and formation of some nascent networks in some of our cities and some of our areas. And so that's one of the things that I'll be emailing you all and the other folk that signed up for this, that view the video, to see where we want to start with that kind of face-to-face training.
Wow.
And that's going to be taking us into the spring. And yes, I've applied for a grant for this, so it's something that we're working on in that respect as well.
The other thing that I also want to emphasize is how do you do with and not do for,
right?
And so part of part of a transformation and empowering a community is empowering the community, right? And so how do we empower the impacted community through this accompaniment, however, whatever we call it, right? And so it's so easy for us, people of privilege, and I would say I'm in that group to a certain extent, to do for, and it's much more efficient sometimes, but not always easy. But so how do we also keep in mind the process where we want to empower the impacted community, because ultimately they have access to their communities, and that's how change is going to happen. And that's something we're still trying to figure out, and it changes moment to moment because it's a transit community and people move and come. And so, but I do want to emphasize that.
Yeah, and that's why it's a network model as opposed to some kind of organizational pyramid model.
Yeah.
If I could share a quick story on that, and it's a great way to demonstrate that what you just talked about, Ruben. And I think a big part that to hold on to is being prepared to come into a space and listen, and be willing to step back and not always, want to jump right in, and you got to spend more time listening and getting to know people. So there was a story there was a city called Milford here in Massachusetts, and I don't know, 10 years ago, there was a case where it was already a town that didn't show much love to their immigrant community, and there was a tragic death that occurred where a man was driving home from work, and he was intoxicated, and he ended up hitting this young man, and the young man died. And so the young man was like this beloved high school student that was just like involved in everything, and the man driving the truck was a person who was undocumented, an immigrant. So the town just blew up. They were just brutal to the community. I mean, they were like throwing things at mothers and children in the street. It was awful. And the call went out through the worker center, who knew a lot of the workers, the people who were workers and associated with that center, and they asked for allies to come attend one of their meetings. They're mostly from Ecuador. And I remember that experience. We brought some people down from our church, and we're like, all right, we're going to go. We have to meet with, and I had it all mapped out in my head. We have to meet with their elected officials. All the things we were going to do to kind of diffuse the situation, and how we were going to help, But we showed up, and it was really important, had done enough of this, and had enough conversations around dismantling white supremacy culture, which informs that, and we've all swim in that toxic soup, anyone who's from the white community. And what happened was, to answer Ruben's question, what we learned was you just sometimes have to get out of the way. These fantastic leaders, the town had never organized, they had never come together. These amazing leaders came forward. They took a path that was completely different than I would have predicted. And what they asked for the allies is they wanted help driving them to the grocery store on the weekends so they could simply buy food for their families without being harassed. So that's what we did. We organized teams to come down. We met them. We'd bring them to the grocery store and stay with them as they did their shopping and get them home safely. And they did things like hold community events that brought people in. What they did, they didn't start with talking to the police and elected officials. They started by talking to their neighbors and built this spirit of goodwill and connection to people that diffused the. It was beautiful. And I always tell the story as a great learning experience for me, because if I wasn't prepared to listen, I could have easily totally destroyed any potential for relationship with them if I came in like, no, this is what you need to do. So just often listening, just relax, settle into yourself and listen and tune into your environment, and don't, sometimes you got to tune down that excitement of wanting to come in and take charge.
That's hard to do, because it's all out of goodwill, I think, but we just have to. It's a fine line. The other thing that I was going to mention is, and this happens a lot, especially this is how we could connect those different areas in Ohio. I mean, there are people sometimes in Dayton that need to get, they have a right to Columbus, but don't have a right back, right? And so we've been able to connect with different cities, but we don't have a good network to do that yet. And we have had the experience even in other countries. We had other states. Somebody from St. Louis was trying to go to New York, and we got a chain of transportation stop in Columbus. We housed someone and then took them to the next spot. So once we get that, I mean, that's something that we have, right? And so I think that's where we're at right now. Is Is it immigration reform? No, but is it policy? No, but it's going back to what we have and as people of faith and just our humanity and so that's no small thing. That's a big thing and even taking I love taking when I can I'll take people to the store, right, and there's a relationship there that's built. And you don't even have to speak the language sometimes. It's good communication, and I guarantee you that you'll be invited to eat at their place, right? And then that's something else, right? The next day, that's what we have to do. So that's part of the things, the kind of the fallout, the good things in accompaniment. And so I think it's time that we do this a little bit more structured, but in a way that's respectful, culturally sensitive, and also knowing when to step in and step out and speak and not speak and just listen most of the time. So we'll be moving on. And Joan did mention the possibility of doing some kind of state trainings and making that connections with different people and they're already there, but connecting them through accompaniment. So I think that can happen. I'm excited about that.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's why we started with that little quote by Margaret Wheatley, the fact that relationships are all there is.
Exactly.
And that's what we're building here. I just got a little note here from Lynn, who wrote to everybody saying the Dayton Rapid Response Group is mainly local immigrant community or people connected to them. And the response group has asked LEAD to organize faith communities to help. And both Lynn and Anwell are UUs, and she just forwarded the email about the upcoming meeting to me so I can share it with everybody. Just wanted to read that.
Thanks, Lynn.
And then, Will, you had a comment here. Do you want to just unmute yourself and ask the question?
Sure. Laura, your last comment of unpacking that kind of white supremacy culture and just being present and responding to their specific needs, it reminded me of what I see. I live in Amish country in Ohio, and I see that between neighbors that are English and Amish, and that as I'm building my understanding of all of this, it sounds like a template that I can use while working in the community, building community, working together, that kind of thing. Yeah. That's it. That's me processing.
Yeah.
Some of the best organizers I know in the New England area, up in northern Vermont, and they work in the dairy farm. So that when I think of more rural areas, and it's very spread out, and the workers know how to organize themselves, and what they needed was rides, because they're most vulnerable. The driving is when they're most at risk. So, and that's that. It's an opportunity to come in to a situation and actually have a huge impact. But in sometimes, and I don't know you guys well, so I'm just going to say this is not a judgment of you, but I struggle. We work a lot with this in Massachusetts. It's not a unique thing, but that dismantling white supremacy, where if you're coming in with that's not an important job, so I'm not going to do it. So learning how to look at things through a different lens, and sometimes providing the food so that the workers can come. They're exhausted. They want to come, and they're organizing themselves. They know what to do. The support people need to just feed them. You're not going to sit at the table with them. And sometimes there's a lot of unlearning and a shift in understanding that can be challenging, particularly for white folks. But if we don't talk about it, we never get there.
Right.
No. And I think that we dismantle white supremacy by doing, and not just by talking about it. And so I like, was it Will who talked about the Amish, and so the real thing is how do we intersect and how do we learn from other communities. And we're specifically working with some of the Black empowerment groups and the queer groups, and I know UUs have been doing that for a while, and other denominations as well, but not to get too caught up in intersectionality, but also understanding you build power with your community. If it's in your community, then that's what you include. And so I did like that comment, well, and I appreciate that.
Thank you. Good observations. Other comments, other thoughts, questions? One of the things that we will do is email everybody on the list and see where the interest lies so that we can start to schedule the face-to-face work that we're going to do. So you can expect that email. And I'm going to ask other people who weren't on the call tonight but are interested to view the video and then be able to respond back as well. So we will be following up with this big time. Any other thoughts?
I'd love to ask a question to the group. Just a few people let me know some feedback. How are you feeling? Because I know a lot of you are already involved in local work. So are you listening to this going like, you know, when I shared what we're doing here, like, oh, that's not going to transplant here. Like, what are your thoughts? Are you really excited? And what is exciting you most? Or what would help you? Is there a barrier that you're seeing that would be good to bring up now so you can work together to overcome that, to make progress?
Or is there so much information people need time to process it before they even know what the questions are? That's okay.
For me, this is Will. I serve in a rural place. This is a nice introduction. It's a lot of information. I'm trying to wrap my head around what it actually looks like here. Folks are isolated on their farms, on their chicken farms, on their dairies. You know, with that isolation, you know, being in the same room, having conversations, that's one of the barriers. But you know, this is kind of my introduction, and so I appreciate all the information. I am totally processing, and now externally. So I'm going to hit mute. So thank you.
Thanks, Will.
Thanks, Will.
This is Chris. I'm in Columbus.
Hi, Chris.
And I think I'm with Will. I'm processing. I need time to think through. Really grateful for this information, and Joan, that you're going to be following up so that we have more information and can kind of figure out how to get involved and how to go forward with this. But right now, I don't know what the obstacles are because I haven't thought through it yet.
Right. But it's good that this is now in your brain. This is now something that you can process, something you can think about. Oh, let's see here. Patty Ray. She needed to be unmuted. And for some reason, we're having trouble unmuting you. There you are, dear. You're unmuted now.
I live in Central Ohio. I'm probably your neighbor in the Amish community. I've noticed we have such a low density population that the people who need assistance are often hidden in our community. A lot of them work on farms, but they're not visible. And I live next to a jail that incarcerates ICE prisoners. And I think that your group, Ruben, has been up demonstrating outside of our jail. But I think I like the idea of face-to-face training, and I'm wondering if we can do like a train the trainer training so that then Will and I can go out into our communities and recruit people who I know are interested and maybe do some basic training with them, because I think Ruben's right. In this low density population, we need to have community groups right in our own little precincts and counties. I don't know.
Right.
It's overwhelming, but I'm really interested in this. This is great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're right on with the training of the trainer, the face-to-face work.
Yeah, I mean, that goes to show, that's a testament to kind of the diversity in Ohio. I mean, I'm in Columbus, but you don't have to go very far to go into a very rural area, right? And immigrants in general come from rural areas, so people are comfortable being in rural areas, but it's a whole different way of communicating and and there's issues in the Main Street rural community, and so I like the idea not to, we tend to dismiss and not focus on the rural, but there's a lot of power, there's a lot of things that are happening there. So I think we need to come up and that should be something that we talk about and kind of emphasize and share stories and strategies, and maybe even look at what other places are doing in rural areas, because I think that that's very real in Ohio. And it's those rural areas where the raids are, really.
Yeah.
The big raids that happen in northern Ohio, were the meat packing places, and basically rural areas, camp areas. And it was hard for us to mobilize, there was no organization there. And there was, but it took a little while for that to happen. And so, I mean, we have a lot to learn, but I seem to think that you who live in those areas, Will, and who's the other person? Is it Chris?
Patty Ray.
Patty. I mean, you have a lot that could share with us because you're there, right? And what's a team look like? What would the team look like in your area, given some of the practices that we could share? And how do you make it real there? And that's when it happens, when you all are eating it. Yeah.
Great.
Patty Ray, I'm from Belleville, and I serve Richland County, Knox County, and Southern Ashland County. Where are you from?
I'm from Mount Gilead, and yes, so very yes. But we could use the same model that we used in the Obama campaigns. Excuse me for bringing it up, but the neighborhood team leader, those are the people we could tap into, and we could use the same structure, which is very much like what Laura described, to reach out to people that we know in our own community who would be willing to step up. They just don't know that they can right now. They don't know how to do it. So.
One thing I can do is I will ask everybody if they're willing to have the registration list for this shared among all the registrants. Mm-hmm. And that way you'll be able to see who's near you. Okay?
That'd be fine.
I'll get that feedback from everybody before I share it.
Cool.
Okay. And we are coming up, on the 8:30 mark, and we did have a covenant that we would end at 8:30. The last thoughts or last statements that somebody wants to bring to us? Okay. Then I have a little closing, but first I want to say a great big lovely thank you to Laura, and an absolutely fantastic, huge thank you to Ruben, and thank you to all of you for being here tonight. And I'm going to close with another statement by Margaret Wheatley, who says that people are the solution to the problems that confront us. Technology is not the solution, although it can help, but we are the solution. We as generous, open-hearted people who want to use our creativity and our caring on behalf of other human beings and all life. So thank you all, and we will be in touch.
Thank you.